A very popular research design in the recent years, especially within the interpretivist camp, is something called, sometimes referred to as grounded theory. Don't use that term, it is wrong. Grounded theorizing, that's a very good term. It is anyway about the process, so you don't make a mistake that way. And of course, I told you already all sorts of problems that we have with the word theory. So originally, the grounded theorizing was developed within the positivist mindset. Obviously, that was the only one, so everything was starting from there. So the point was that it was developed with the attempt to address some of the weaknesses of positivism. So it was already from the outset, it was kind of going out from positivism, and today there is not much done as grounded theory in a positivist camp. So the original version would have demanded a completely empty slate. So the idea was that you focus on the data. Basically, grounded theorizing means that all your speculation is grounded in the data rather than in the literature. It goes so far that it says that you don't do a lit review. You start with collecting data, and usually they work with interviews, by the way, and sometimes observations. And after you have done some analysis, only then you start reading something. Now, in the extreme case, and that was the first generation grounded theorizing, it actually had the same demand as the positivist research often has, that you start with an empty mind. Now, one of the most popular people in this area is Dennis Joya. So I approached him at a conference, and I told him, I said, Benny, you know, it is a BS when you say that you start with an empty mind. So you do most of your research interviewing top 100, Fortune top 100 CEOs. If nothing else, you know how to get into room with these CEOs, which almost nobody can do in the academic world. So obviously you are not starting with an empty mind. And he said, of course, I'm not starting with an empty mind. So anyway, we did not have a fight about that, although I thought we might. So basically, it is not a kind of not a requirement anymore that you start with a completely empty mind, but they still stick with this idea that you don't read about your research topic before you start, that you start with the empirical data, so data first kind of approach. And this is what they mean by that the theorizing is grounded in the data. So what is important is that it doesn't mean that you don't look into the literature, but you look at it in order to explain, to understand what your data has, what your data says to you. And that's a problem a little bit, because you might find out that the literature already contains what you have found. Okay, so it is pretty easy to get to the reinventing the wheel type problem. Okay, so in that sense, as a kind of pure form, grounded theorizing is a little bit tricky. The other thing is, there is a very important thing that they acknowledge very explicitly, and I think that they did it before anyone else did. So the grounded theorizing guys were the first one to talk about it, that as soon as you start collecting your data, you start analyzing it. You cannot help it, simply because you are a human being. So, but they encourage that to be done explicitly, so that you actually start your formal analysis as soon as you start collecting your data, and that you do that on ongoing basis. So basically, the data collection and the data analysis become a simultaneous process, and then this is followed by the lit review. So it goes against everything that you might have learned about the process of research beforehand. So it is very useful for example, getting original insights, because you are not limited by what is in the literature. On the other hand, you might very well discover something that is already in the literature. So this is basically the whole idea. Oh yes, and the grounded theorizing also is used as a method within other research designs. So it is a little bit kind of less trivial than it might sound from this brief explanation.